Well, it may seem an unusual topic to be discussing for a bar convention, threats and violence against the legal profession. But the fact is that threats and violence directed against legal professionals are documented in a long-standing issue that's affecting the legal profession, the justice system, and the public concerns. Threats and violence against members of the legal profession, it affects physical safety and workplace safety for all of us. And it can alter professional conduct, the potential affecting the competency of the work that we do, and ethical legal representation that's provided, as well as the function of our justice system. And it raises questions regarding the interconnected interests of physical safety, professional well-being, professional functioning, and access to justice. My purpose this morning is to share and discuss the results of the Utah State Bar Association's 2026 survey on threats and violence against the legal profession. But in doing so, is to examine and discuss the context of threats and violence against the legal profession, some of what's taking place in national studies, as well as past Utah studies, the 2026 survey itself, and then answer any questions that you may have in regards to the survey. To begin with this discussion, I want to go back and discuss just a couple of events which occurred in Utah. Going back to 1927, Eliza Simmons, a widow frustrated with the settlement for her husband's wrongful death case and the dismissal of subsequent wrongful death case that she brought, entered into the court of Judge Tillman Davis Johnson at the old federal courthouse in Main Street. Once the judge took the bench, she stood up, approached the bench, and then fired a .22 gun, and she got off 6 shots, 3 of which struck the judge. He was injured, he survived it, and at least up until the recent renovations of the courthouse that are ongoing, you could still find the filled bullet holes in the woodwork behind the fence in the courthouse. I don't know if any of you have ever gone to the courthouse and seen that yourself. On April 2nd, 1985, Ronnie Lee Gardner was slipped a gun by his girlfriend while being escorted into the old Salt Lake courthouse. He shot an unarmed guard and escaped into the courtroom archive office, and unfortunately, Attorney Michael Burdell was there, and Gardner shot and killed him. Now, since that time, the Utah legal community hasn't suffered a direct tragedy like these. However, it doesn't make Utah legal community immune from national trends. There are events which are taking place. And I want to discuss with you what is going on nationally and what is taking place that we can see. Now, the U.S. Marshal Service protects more than 2,700 sitting judges and approximately 30,300 federal prosecutors and court officials. As reported by Frederick S. Calhoun in a 1998 book, A Hunters and Howlers, from 1980 through September 30th, 1993, that covers a period of approximately 14 years, the U.S. Marshals reported a total of 3,096 inappropriate communications or threats and assaults against federal judiciary officers. That may seem like a very large number, but that's actually an average of 238 per year. In the fiscal years of 2008 through 2010, that's covering 3 years, there were 4,062 inappropriate communications or threats. That averages 1,354 per year. Those areas. We start seeing a growing trend. From 2016, case numbers have dramatically increased. You'll see there's a gap in 2014 and 15. U.S. Marshals stopped giving the measurement data in regards to the threats that were being recorded against the federal personnel, just for the 2 years. Then they returned back to the same reporting standard. So in 2016, 2,037 threats. 2017, 2,247 threats. 2018, 4,542 threats. 2019, 4,449 threats. 2020, 4,261 threats. 2021, 4,511. 2021 into 2022, the U.S. Marshals stopped reporting how many threats they received. Instead, they changed the reporting service. Instead, what they do now is, you can look this up on their fact sheets, they report the number of investigations that they are doing on threats. So 2022, they investigated 1,362 of investigations of 403 threats on 302 different judges. For 2023, 1,060 investigations of 630 threats on 455 different judges. 2024, 822 investigations of 509 threats on 379 different judges. The point being is that it's changing. So for 2026, in the first 2 months, there have been 230 investigations of 176 threats on 151 different judges. That's just to put it in context. So what's taking place on the Utah level? From 2014 through 2017, a 4-year period, there were 79 reported threats statewide against our judges. 21 of these were from the domestic cases, 17 juvenile court related, 43 reported by counsel. And we have it though, as far as the notes that were taken on these, there were 17 calls that requested suspicious information. There were 2 surveillance that was taken by the court, and 1 suspicious package that was left with by now. As a jump, you can take a look at how that's changed. 2023 through 2025, that's just covering the 3-year period. There have been 117 threats, 102 written electronic, 15 verbal. There have been 6 swatting, false reports, 1 doxing, publication of private information, and security breach. So there are arrests that are taking place with our Utah courts. And there have been just in the last couple of days. This doesn't include those. Here. So in looking at it, the point being is that here, while the Utah legal profession has not suffered a life-taking event in many years, it doesn't mean that threats and violence just aren't frequently occurring. So what's going on and why? It's an unfortunate reality that public confidence in the legal profession is low. It's been on the decline for more than 25 years. You can look up studies to talk about this. The trust in the legal profession is commonly equated with politicians and used car salesmen. And there's no offense intended in that, but that is how it's often recorded. Public confidence in the U.S. courts is continuing to drop. While the December 2024 DCSD state court survey shows a slight increase in confidence in state courts, in contrast, the December 2024 Gallup poll, it shows a dramatic drop in trust in the judiciary as a whole. Attorneys are viewed as money-grubbing, arrogant, overbearing, and indifferent to justice. Unpopular court decisions and spread of misinformation results in suspicion and anger towards courts in general. A judge who holds the fate of life, liberty, and property can become a convenient target to anyone who perceives that they didn't get what they wanted. And similarly, it's common for one or more parties who are involved in a criminal or civil case to blame someone for the outcome that's not in their favor. An attorney who fails to meet the perceived wants of clients and those who support them becomes the target of the cause of injustice. And similarly, lawyers who impede opposing parties' wants and those who support them similarly become the target and the cause of injustice. There's always someone on the opposite side of the case who's unhappy with what took place. It becomes a spillover event, and the easiest target to put the blame on becomes an attorney or the judge. So in this, back in the year 2000, I was working up in the parties report, and I was interested in threats and violence, heard stories, and so I did a survey of the Davis County Bar. What I found in that small survey of 161 members, small group, was with 130 responses, so there was an 81% response rate. They reported 13% of them had experienced physical assaults. That's pretty high, particularly when you're talking about 130 people. And then 59% of them identified that they were the recipient of threats. And 49% reported the threats to police. The only other prior reported U.S. survey on threats and violence was conducted by the ADA's Family Section in 1997, and it's only received 253 responses for its entire membership. There was another survey which was done by the Pennsylvania Prosecutor's Office, but it was solely in regards to the prosecutor's office to see what was taking place. Because of it, I was interested to find out what was going on and to get a broader view. I approached the Utah State Bar in 2006 to see if they'd be willing to do a survey of the entire state bar to see what kind of experiences were taking place here in Utah, threats and violence against Utah legal profession. At that time, there was no national method for reporting threats and violence against the profession, except with the U.S. Marshals Service. And with the survey, it was the first statewide survey of threats and violence against the legal profession nationally. And the results to be found, if you want to go back and look at it, it's on the bar website in the July-August 2006 Utah Bar Journal. Its findings alone demonstrate the importance of understanding the scope and to notice that these incidents are occurring within our legal profession. I want to give you just a few examples of what some of the attorneys reported in the survey. Over the years, various telephone threats of bodily harm, vulgar notes, signed and unsigned, numerous incidents of vandalism of my house and car. My husband did likely representing abused spouses and divorces. I was told by gang detectives after visiting the prison that two gangs played to get out on me. Individual ran me off the road after court, didn't hurt me, big threats, and really scared me. The past defendant posted a statement on the website that he intended to kill me and my family. Client threatened to have me killed because she was not happy with the outcome of auto personal communications. I made a bomb placed in my mailbox. Telephone messages left with details of my maintenance and places and times that I'd be vulnerable to attack. The threats of violence, but didn't change my position on a case. There was one example of a fake hand that was left on a doorstep and covered with fake blood. That was the first national survey in regards to the first statewide survey of violence against the legal profession of the United States. Based on that, we should have the results here. At the time in Utah, there were 6,832 in-state members. There were 904 responses. It equated to about 13.2% of FAR response. The survey generally looks for a number which is greater than 6%. There were 417 threats of violence reported in the survey. 63 physical assaults, and over 300 examples of threats and violence. So you can then I'll come back with some of these results in comparison to the 2026 survey. So since 2006, I've had the opportunity to approach other state bars and see if they need will be new surveys as well. And with that, I've been able to get 29 other states to be able to conduct the same survey. So there have been 30 states across the United States which have conducted a threats and violence survey of their membership. And it's very interesting to look at because the numbers, when you start looking at the number of responses and also looking at is the general number of threat rates, they start to come within a margin of area, well, not area, but a margin of the same kind of level. It might be a little higher, it might be a little lower, but they're reporting the same kind of things taking place nationwide. Now, the kinds of threats and violence that are being experienced can differ depending where you are in the United States. Some of these states have very much a problem with organized crime, and a lot of those threats are directly related to organized crime. Some of them have serious gang problems, which identify what's taking place. Some of them are dealing with regular problems associated with supremacy groups, and they identify those as being a major source of the threats and violence which occur. It's very interesting to see that, but you can see by the region where that's occurred. Also, in how the attorneys respond and how they're responding to these different issues. And that's a different discussion, though. Let me take you on to talk about what it does show. On all these surveys, across the board, the areas with the highest threats and violence are family law, criminal prosecution, criminal defense, and general practice. Now, that area of general practice is very hard to measure because if you're in the area of general practice, you very well could be doing family law or criminal defense. So in reading the responses of what kind of threats and violence occur, they're reporting issues that take place in family law and criminal defense. Those numbers can be a lot higher than what is reported. But let's turn to the survey that took place earlier this year. From January to February, the Utah Bar redid this survey, 20 years in the making, to take a look at what's going on here in Utah since. And with the new survey, the survey allows us to compare the data across 2 decades and identify how the nature, the frequency, and the sources of threats have evolved in the past 20 years. The results, we covered the in-state membership of the bar. It's nearly doubled in the last 20 years. These are the questions that were asked. I know if any of you, maybe you can't read these. They were the same survey questions as were asked back in 2006. There were a couple additional questions just to get a better feel and find out what a distinction is with what occurred. Here were the results. We now have 12,847 in-state members. So far has nearly doubled in 20 years. We had 6,832 members back in 2006. There were 1,593 responses, so we had a response rate of 12.4%. This is just slightly lower than what it was in 2006. 703 responses identified that they were the recipients of threats and violence. 58 physical assaults, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And over 600 examples of threats and violence. Now, with these, again, what they show is that the main areas of the practice of law which are receiving threats and violence here in Utah are family law, criminal prosecution, criminal defense, and again, you get this general practice area which is covering the criminal defense in family law. But what's also interesting with this is other. 20% of the respondents, which identified that they received threats and violence, do not fall into the categories of the survey. Let me show you. And so these are the categories provided. And you see at the bottom, this other category. Many of the attorneys that responded identified themselves as involved in banking, personal injury, mediation, intellectual property, tax, workers' compensation, child welfare, and others. So the main point I'm trying to make here is, if you're thinking, all right, I don't do family law, I don't do criminal work, I'm okay. That's just not the case. Because 20% of the respondents that are receiving threats are identifying they don't do those things, but they're still receiving threats. It's covering the board. Let's look at some questions that are involved here. The types of threats. Inappropriate threatening communications. The respondents had 566 identified this. From the 2006 survey, this number is down. So as far as the communications, what we're seeing is there's a switch that's taken place from the 2006 survey. Naturally, some written communications that are being sent by letter, it's now switching over to email. It's switching over to social media. And in that process, the number of threats which are going online are down. But then when you look at the inappropriate approaches where people are coming up and making directed threats, they nearly doubled. So the directed threats of someone coming up and making a direct threat against counsel is doubled. With the assaults, has actually doubled. Originally, it was 25 were reported, and with the 2026 survey, 58. Now, that may not seem like a lot of numbers, so up with 58 compared to 25. But when you think about it, an assault, 58 assaults against attorneys, that's quite a bit of assaults. And then property damage. This was a new category for the 2026 survey. There was a lot of property damage which is identified in the surveys. Most of this takes place in vehicles. So if you're parking somewhere that people know it's your car, you got a nice car, beware. There's a lot of slashed tires, couch rubbing, just scratching it, being the cars. They're just doing what they can to damage it. I'll read you a few of the responses in regards to the kinds of threats that have come from the survey. I received a death threat, had my car damaged, verbally assaulted, and had an opposing party unsuccessfully physically assault me in the courtroom during a recess. I was on a hit list where a person making the threat posted the list online and was arrested with guns in the trucks on the way to take care of people on the list. So that nearly happened. Someone called 911 saying they were heading to the office where I and other individuals from another state agency worked, saying he was going to, quote, take care of things. He had previously made threats of violence involving firearms toward the police officers. The police came to our office and evacuated everyone. Client threw a Molotov-type bottle through my front office window. As a result of court order, opposing party began threats and pleadings and emails, telephone harassment, assaulted in the office, all the same individual. Aryan Nation threatened to murder me and my minor child. They stalked his home, at his school, and at the courthouse. Client threatened to kill me 9 years ago when I communicated that I would not help him with matter that would likely aid police conduct. The client choked me out in my house. I was working late in a small office, had a visual windows facing the street. In a nighttime call, opposing party stated that he was watching me and described things he could see through the window, including a detailed description of the building and that he was going to harm me. Threats to kill me, kill my staff, utter dead bodies with text saying that this would be me and my staff. Someone cut both brake lines on my bike, that I used to commute to work was caused me to wreck to avoid hitting a car. As I drove away from opposing party's deposition, a man stood next to a truck parked at the side of the road. As my vehicle approached, he retrieved a shotgun from the bed of the truck. He cocked the gun while staring at me as I passed. My home was entered and a fire was started in 2012. Arson was the police conclusion. I was punched in the head of court in front of the judge by my client in mental health court. It resulted in a large goose egg on my head, and I had a concussion-related symptoms which made me difficult at work for about 3 months. Pulled across the conference table by my necktie, tires blackened into the court parking lot, threats written in purple against my family and me personally. Or they sound kind of sensational, but the point is that they're really happening. The number of threats received. From the 2006 survey, the number of threats received in comparison with today has gone down if it's one threat. So originally back in 2006, there were reported 159 threats. 2026, we have a rate of 130 threats. Okay. If you look at 2 threats, it's gone up. 2006, there were 114. We're now at 164. 3 threats, 50. We're now at 112. 4 threats, 12 in 2006, 56, 2026, and then more than 408 compared with now 195. So back in the 2006 survey, individuals that reported 4 or more threats was 27%. It's now 38%. The locations of threats. The number one location where threats appear to be taking place is the business office. Next from that is the courthouse. Residents, this is disturbing. You can see the residents, people are reporting, attorneys are reporting threats at the residence, 75. And then you've got elsewhere, 190. And what are we talking about when we see these other locations? The grocery store, at mediation, walking to and from court, church meetings, wedding reception, public meetings, and restaurants. And it's just happening on the streets. A particular concern is the at home. Well, some of these are troubling. Well, they're all troubling. Here's some of these from the survey about what's taking place at home. Written death threats to self and family left on our front porch. Opposing party parked outside my house. When I approached, he shouted a few words at me and drove off. My opponent indicates that someone called my wife at 3 in the morning and said, "Did you know that I have been hired to break your husband's legs?" And the state air and the state hospital tracked one of my vehicles and accosted my daughter before using a hammer on my car. I've been observed with my children in the community, and my children told I'm an awful person. An active group found and published my work and home addresses in the schools my children attended in their area threat. Once an opposing party to a divorce drove by and stopped in front of my house to try to engage my 6-year-old daughter in conversation. I had an opposing party threaten to come to my house and kill me. He had once went to my neighbors and given my address. He later told the court he sold the gun that he intended to kill me with. Threatened to have my children and send me photos of horses without arms and legs and heads, and said they knew where my children went to school and made school. It's troubling. The relationship of the individual who threatened or resolves it you. Now, these numbers in relationship to the 2006 survey In regards to the client, the numbers have gone up, almost doubled. Associates with the client, they've almost doubled. The opposing party, they're about the same. The relationship association with the opposing party, they've gone down. Opposing counsel. Now, in 2006, threats and violence from opposing counsel, the number of threats and violence reported was 27. It's now 24. All right, no one clap. There's no reason to clap about that number going down. I want to share some of these. A Utah attorney came over the table, did a deposition with clenched fists, swinging at me. I was assaulted in court by opposing counsel. One threat from opposing counsel in court resulted in an open court apology. An attorney now retired threatened to punch me in the racist back for realizing he was on camera. Assaulted in court by an attorney to push me while at the elevator after hearing. On a public podcast, opposing counsel said he would like to run him out of his car. Now, you'll see under this last area, other isn't just that, it's not attorneys, it's just that it's not related necessarily to the case. Some attorneys have been identified, they identify just walking down the street, and someone recognizing them as attorney, they don't know what relation they are to the case, and then they're friends. Are you an attorney? Or it might be a partner in their own law firm, or it is opposing counsel for a partner in their law firm. This would be a threat of some kind. An example, a partner disagreed with my approach to a technology, and I told him he was wrong. He threw a heavy reference book at me. Things are happening. Did they report to the police? So some of these are reported to the police. In back with the 2006 survey, the number of reports was 144. The numbers fell up. Now, to the extent of if it actually is effective, I can't say from the survey itself. The survey doesn't go into that. It altered the way you conduct your legal practice. 2026, only 28 respondents reported that it had affected the way they conducted their practice of the rate deal. In 2026, we've got 45 respondents say it has. The issue is, attorneys do not come out of law school considering that they might be recipients of threats and violence. I don't know about any of you. It was never discussed in any of my law school classes. Maybe you saw something like that occur on TV, but that's just a TV show. This is an issue for lawyers' well-being. It is directly related to the professional and how we practice. The responses by many legal practitioners has been to protect themselves. And the response that they give is they're harming themselves. So they're obtaining concealed by them. Others have indicated that they're glad that they've retired or that they're near retirement because they believe or they perceive that the number of threats are going up and they don't want to be involved in it anymore. One attorney identified that they tell any individual student who can talk to them about going to law school, don't do it. This isn't good for the legal community. This is not helpful. Others have reported about taking other security steps and procedures to protect their offices. This is just good understanding of what should be done. The real point on this is a telling effect of the survey. When we look at the survey, when have these threats been received? Since the last survey, and you see here that more than 20 years ago, only 44 of the individuals who received threats and violence identified that it occurred. The last time they received a threat or violence occurred over 20 years ago. And with that, That is 93% of the respondents are identifying the last time they received threats or violence as occurred within the past 20 years. This is an ongoing problem for Florida's in our membership. With that, the point that's being made is that threats and violence against the Utah legal profession, it's really occurring. That it's a safety issue and it affects a rule of law. When lawyers and judges work under fear, they work under fear for themselves and for their families, that affects their well-being. It affects the well-being of those that they work with. And in doing so, it can directly affect the judgments that they make, how they practice, and the conditions and the competency, and then ultimately on legal practice. With this information from the survey, the bar can better understand the risks that are being experienced by members of the bar, the well-being of the Utah bar, steps that can be taken to identify patterns that are occurring in threats and violence against its membership, and support measures that protect and mitigate both the legal community and the public's access to justice. And I'd like to answer any questions you may have about the survey to respond to this. Yes.
If you can 12% survey, do you have like asked of what time some take to place of the submitted unstoppable what they should take the trends out to 100% statistical insistence analysis.
And that's very difficult. And yes, what's been asked is looking at a roughly 12% response rate. Can we extrapolate that out as to what the entire measurement of, correct me if I'm wrong, saying this, the entire measurement of what's being experienced by the bar? And I don't believe we can. And there's multiple reasons for this. And it cuts both ways, because in speaking with attorneys and asking them, they need to take the survey, and they'll say, yeah, I experienced that, but they didn't respond to the survey. But also recognizing that a survey like this is going to attract people to respond that have experienced threats and violence. That's going to be natural. But at the very base level, what it's going to show, and does show, is that there is a set number of members of the bar which absolutely have experienced threats and violence. So when we talk about 12.1% of membership have experienced a response rate of threats and violence, that also equates, when we look at a hard number, is we're looking at about 5.5% of the bar as a hard number at least. So if we're looking at 5 out of every 100 members of the bar have experienced threats or violence. At least. Mm-hmm. And when we look at the national surveys, it's generally somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 7%. Yes?
Does your survey revolve any significant differences between mild versus partially hearing?
It does not. It didn't take into account whether it was urban or rural. But that is a very good question. Yeah.
Have you gone back to any of the states that you previously surveyed? And if so, what are their results?
So this is the first survey which goes back as a follow-up survey. There are going to be follow-up surveys. Michigan is doing a follow-up survey. I believe it's supposed to be starting this month. And it's a much more in-depth survey.
Are there legislative solutions that have been explored either in our state or another state to maybe say, talked about the importance of the rule of law, there maybe a zero tolerance, the statute out there, right? It's true.
There is, and I apologize, I'm going to mix this up. It's either Michigan or Wisconsin did follow up with statutory law and has put more restrictions in place in regards to a threat that is made against a legal practitioner or an act against a legal practitioner. I just don't have that in front of me. Far back.
How are you going to this world that experience threat of violence?
And that's a fair question. And I admit, I did want to ask this question because it's been asked. I'm going to ask it now, and I'm going to preface this. An issue that comes up with threats and violence in the legal profession is that it's not talked about. Attorneys don't go around and say, hey, let me tell you about the threat I received, or let me tell you about how I was assaulted. And there's multiple reasons for this. And it generally comes down to that, one, you don't want that out there. You know, there's a fear or concern that you don't want to be that practitioner, because maybe it has a stigma to it that, oh, you did something wrong. And this just isn't true. This is happening across the board. You should not have to feel this way. And with that, though, it's also very often when there's a threat, it's just kind of brushed off as, oh, it's another threat. You know, I've been doing divorce for so long, it's just another threat. But there are circumstances you really do need to take steps and be watching for what kind of threat are you really having. If you have someone which is coming into your office or sneaking into your office or is following you home, you better be on the alert, because there are steps, the stages of threats. And when it reaches a stage, you should be really watching out. But that's a discussion for another day, and certainly safety training. With that asked, let me put it out there. How many of you in this room have received threats in your practice? Take a look around the room. And for here in this room, this speaks for itself. And that also goes to answer to your question. I do believe that the survey is representative of membership at the bar. Now, not every practice, of course, but certainly the membership. I'm going to ask a harder question. How many of you have experienced an assault related to your practice? So that once you report, but I mean, already just from the numbers which of hands raised in this room, we were looking at maybe a third of numbers which were reported here. And we're only talking about some 300 individuals membership at the bar, which are there at this conference, versus the total membership. So that really goes to the point. This really is an issue that members of the bar are facing. Any other questions? Well, I do know that, oh yes.
Quick, there was a large percentage that did not report to the police. Was there a follow-up question of why they did not report to the police?
No, there was not a follow-up question. So for purposes of the hope of having individuals actually respond to the survey was kept brief. And my understanding of the Michigan survey is at least 3 to 4 times longer than this survey. So we'll see if people hang in there to answer a lot deeper questions. Yeah. Before ending, any other questions? Yes.
I've seen bar associations try non-legislative efforts to map this. Did
Yes.
just have any success?
The issue is measurement of success. So far, there isn't a way to measure the success, but yes. And it's really through safety trainings. So even the APA in some of the sections has those safety trainings. I take part in presenting some of those safety trainings. And what are we looking for? What's taking place as far as what should you be recognizing? What steps can attorneys be doing in order to avoid it? And if you're trapped in a circumstance where threat is imminent, what should you do? And so those trainings are taking place. And that is, that's part of why we're having this survey done. What can the bar do? And what should the bar be looking at as something beneficial for its memory? Yes?
For a difference in gender?
There is a difference in gender. I don't have all the numbers for you, but let me give you just a little breakdown of the gender, male, female. And I don't have the total results associated with this. Back in 2006, the survey had a total responses for females of 252. And then those that reported violence, 115. It was a 45.6% response rate, saying that they were receiving threats of violence. And for the males, there were 717 with 334 that identified threats. And so they had a 46.6% rate. It was right there. And then if you look at this survey for females, those individuals who identify themselves as female, there was 534. So what I do like about this, when you look at the numbers on the survey, the membership of the bar there are more females that are members. It's becoming more gender. I don't want to say it's perfect in any way, shape, or form, but there are more females now at the bar than there used to be, and there are more responses to the survey than there was before. So it doubled. There were 534 individuals identifying themselves as female. Of those, 237 identified that they received threats of violence. That was a rate of 44.4%. And with men, the response rate was 1,040. 703 identified themselves as receiving threats of violence, which again is a 44.2%. So again, they were matching. The kinds of threats that they received, though, are different. There is a difference in the kind of threats by gender. There was another question to ask.
That was the question.
That was the question, Lisa. Yes.
This readily investigation or consideration of threats made to clients of that phrase can do.
The question is, has there been any study in regards, and you correct me if I'm wrong, any study in regards to the threats made against clients in conjunction with the survey? And the answer is no. That's a good question, though. Yes? I'm sorry, I can't hear that.
What are the differences in the kinds of female and female? So there were differences of quality.
They're generally sexual in nature. So the last question on the survey asks if the individuals that took part in it are willing to share some of the experience that they had in the threats or assaults. And the ones that haven't shared and identify some form which relates when the threat is made, it appears to be more gender specific, like it is with women rather than men.
This study, if the bar is having disciplinary actions, it's a healthy that it makes graphics.
I have not. I think that's a very good question. Yeah. But it is interesting. One of the trends which appears to show up here in the 2026 survey is complaints by attorneys identifying that complaints to Utah Bar appear to be becoming weaponized by non-martyrs. In that, so there are claims being made to the Utah Bar against attorneys, not by the parties that are involved in the cases, but by outside parties. And but I haven't investigated that. Any questions? Yes.
Is there any standard protocol in the state but we are going to receive possibly rounds this going to place when so there's a report made of the song where every things we're talking about the number of reported. I assume that's the place where a prosecutor talks. It's very protocol and standard is followed with that occurs.
I don't know. Yeah. You know, if it's to the police as far as protocol for threats made to attorneys, I believe that would be a jurisdictional thing. I just don't know. And so I believe that they would evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
Steve, have they done anything to determine why some lawyers are assaulted or threatened and many are not? Maybe I've been at it as long as anybody in this room probably. Don't know the Fred statement I go out.
Well, that's a good question. That's one of the questions that the Michigan survey is going to be delving into. And so it kind of raises the question of, is it the practice area? Is it the attorney and how they approach people? And that's a very good question. Is it how we are communicating with people that becomes the problem? Or is it the community that we're dealing with that can become the problem? Now, remember, many of us, we don't have an opportunity to deal with who's on the other side of the case. And sometimes those individuals are not going to be mentally stable individuals. And it could just be the luck of the draw that you may end up dealing with an unstable individual who is going to make threats, or it could be a violent individual. Any other questions?
Just the stigma. Twist to bars to response to effort such actual attorneys. You make me threats against opposing counsel. The decision cities as Chip.
That's an individual basis with the whole PC. But
We
that's a
could
very
hear
good
the
question.
We couldn't hear the
Oh,
question.
sorry. The question was, what is the bar's response to individuals, attorneys, that are making threats or acting violently against other attorneys? And my response to that is, that's an action and question for the OPC on professional conduct. I don't know what those actions are, and to the extent of it, it's worth asking though. And thank you. I will check into that, at least to the extent that they're permitted to at least provide that kind of information. So then, with that, if you have any other questions associated with the survey, please feel free to reach out to me. There will be more information forthcoming, because the whole point of the survey is to understand what's really taking place out there. I do appreciate the opportunity and the recommendation of asking to raise hands. I think show of hands here today makes the point all in itself, and also about what can be done to help the members of the bar for our well-being, and protecting ourselves, so we can at least go forward in the practice and do what it is that we need to do in our jobs without having to worry about the fears of outside sources and threats and violence. So thank you very much.